Hello, my name is Joy. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about some non-fiction books that I read recently. This is the second part of my wrap-up, and if you want to see the fiction books I read, I'll put the link in the description. I really enjoyed these non-fiction books and took a lot out of them. I have so many notes I wrote down, so I'm going to try to share some of the most interesting parts and summarize my thoughts as best as I can, but it's going to be a little bit of a conversation. Getting into the first book, I read The Persuaders, Winning Hearts and Minds in a Divided Age by Giridharadas. And this is looking at sort of political change making from the perspective of persuading people in lots of different ways. He basically interviews different activists and organizers and people working in social movements who have this experience and really, I guess, specialize in the skill of persuasion and see that as a real path to change, to progressive change. So I guess I picked this up because it definitely resonates a lot and is very related to some of my own political beliefs and things that I participate in. I really believe in social movements that are built by people and people power, and that most of people power is built through deep and meaningful interactions with other people. So you can have that on a large scale in terms of public narratives and media narratives, but honestly a lot of that is in one-to-one connections or group connection. We should be trying to build strategies on the left to tap into that in a variety of different ways that reaches a variety of people that we have in society. So I think a lot of that philosophy has guided this book and the people who are interviewed in this book. I think when I read it, I was a little bit harsh because I did feel like the writing didn't add a whole lot, or I would have liked to just hear directly from the people themselves. But I think that is a bit harsh because actually going and compiling all of these different stories is in itself a work of journalism that is really important. And the truth is, a lot of organizers don't have the time to just sit down and write a well-written piece. I could talk about the ideas in this book for ages, and in fact I have talked about a lot of these in depth with people in my life that I organize with, but I'll just mention a few things that I really appreciated. There's a Black abolitionist activist, Loretta Ross, who was talking about brave spaces, not safe spaces. And that wording has really stuck with me. I think it is really beautiful to imagine ourselves building brave spaces together to go out, and yes, there's a certain amount of healing that is important to be able to face the world, but it's you're only healing enough to have that strength to go out and face the world again, not to necessarily escape from it. There was also an idea from Erica Merritt, who's one of the facilitators in their anti-racism workshops. That chapter was kind of exploring the idea of meeting people where they're at and whether you hold back or dilute your messaging, rather than saying white patriarchy. Is that off-putting to some people? And how can you change the language but not change the message and the point that you're trying to get across? And I really liked the framing that she used, which is that you have to create the conditions of readiness, which is basically you can't force people to change. And I think this is a really big lesson that people who get interested in social justice causes, it can often take a long time to realize. And I definitely had this as a teenager as well, where you think that just because you have the right ideas and the kind of moral position, that if you just say that clearly enough or loudly enough, that other people have to listen. And if people aren't listening, it's because there's something wrong with them, or that they are in conflict with you. But I think really it's important to see that people can change and people's minds can change if they have ownership of that. They're not going to be forced, and actually trying to force someone to change their mind or agree with you often backfires. And anyone who's tried to have a debate will probably know this, or try to convince a relative who really doesn't want to have the conversation. This instinctually. But I think again, on the left, and especially online, because you can't have real conversations online, people forget this. And so I really like that she's saying you have to create those conditions. Like, you do have to create some sense of urgency or curiosity in someone, and that is something we can still do. There are more specifics in this book and probably outside of this book about what are those conditions for readiness. But yes, anyway, that is just the mission basically. So adding on to that, from Anachenko Osario, there's like an idea of people being undecided and being persuadable, and rather than looking at those people as being kind of in the middle of two opinions and having like a hybrid version of two opinions. So she gives the example of if you can't decide whether you want to eat pizza or burgers for dinner, someone who is undecided, they don't want like a mix of the two. Usually people don't want something in the middle, they just haven't decided one way or the other, but they will land one way or the other. One of the people who does door knocking, which by the way is just when you like knock on people's doors for a political conversation, but they were talking about how people are often divided against themselves and how like you can have opposing views within yourself, and the job of someone who's having a persuasive conversation is to help them land on the view that you want them to land on. And I think that's really useful to like see it not as this like middle ground where you have to come up with sort of like a message that's sort of in the middle and that's a bit more lukewarm. Like, actually you should stick with your message and you should find the little bits of a person that agrees with your message and bring that to the forefront. So that felt really relevant, both from like looking at the Democratic Party and I guess a lot of different equivalents of like center parties, political parties who do this like lukewarm messaging, and it's like, it's not working because that's not actually what people want. It just makes your position weaker and it makes the right wing a lot stronger because they're at least holding strong in their convictions and having really clear messages and really aggressive messages. And so like having this weird little thing like, okay, we'll try to appease everyone by doing like a little bit of everything or going a little bit in the middle and like constantly changing our opinion to like, or what we say based on what we think everyone will like, is just not helpful, because most people want to go one way or the other, and if you don't go with the strong left-wing progressive like justice-focused messaging, then the right wing is gonna win. So it's useful from that level to like, I guess, look at how these parties are often failing, but also from the position of someone who tries to have persuasive conversations, and whether you're doing that with like a political or organizing group, or if you just are someone who does this in your real life and like tries to have difficult conversations with people in your life. I don't know how much of that made sense. It is a little bit weird talking about these ideas in an abstract way. Like, it is much more useful to have the case studies like this book does, or to apply it in real life, I guess, which I was doing while I was reading. But yeah, this was really, really good. I think it is really fascinating for anyone who's interested in politics at this time and age, honestly. Like, I think if you haven't engaged with any like organizing, I think this is a really good intro because you learn about so many different parts of the movement. Like, it would be a great intro to like why this kind of work is so important, and maybe it'll convince you to get involved. But for anyone who's already engaged, like, I think there's a lot of really great lessons in this, so yeah, I would strongly recommend it. So it turns out I do have a reason to go faster, and that's because my phone storage is going to run out. So moving on to the second book, I read Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Y. Davis, and the subtitle for this is Ferguson, Palestine and the Foundations of a Movement. So this was released in 2016, and it has speeches and interviews from 2014 to 2016 that cover a lot of stuff around the military-industrial complex and police brutality, how those two things are connected, looking with the abolitionist lens and an anti-capitalist lens, as Angela Davis is kind of known for. And so the events that are, I guess, kind of prominent and talked about a few times without being directly explained in this book, it's more like her take on these events, was the protests following the death of, was it Michael Brown, who was a black man killed by the police. And the protests were met with a very militarized police presence. They'd been given technology and equipment and training from Israeli military, so there was this link to the global arms trade and this like global fight against terror. I think that's a really important theme and idea that she talks about in this book, is what is defined as terror and how that is being weaponized against anyone who opposes these capitalist regimes. So a major point that she's talking about is these security companies that are private companies that have managed to like become a part of lots of different sectors, including like schools, not really held to public scrutiny and not necessarily serving people, and are actually the source of a lot of violence in the world. And so she's talking about like why this is, and also creating the links between movements, because another thing that happened with the like Ferguson events was that Palestinian people who had learnt how to protect themselves from the Israeli kind of strategies were sharing that information like on Twitter to protesters. So also kind of looking at the links like the BDS movements around the world and stuff like that. Another big topic she talks about is prisons and incarceration, and I really liked this theme or idea she had about how prisons foreclose conversation and action on social issues. This is kind of like the ideas that, you know, crime should be treated as a healthcare issue, and that a lot of the time like the only reason for crime and violence is because of poverty, because of a lack of like opportunities for young people or for marginalized people, and like it's the result of a lot of inequality, like things like that. But I really liked her conversation about I guess how it is used as a distraction, and looking at that from like a state level, but also even like a personal level a little bit. Those are ideas that really also resonate with this like Kingian non-violence stuff that I've read in Healing Resistance, which I've talked about before on this channel. But yeah, it makes me definitely really interested to read more of her work on prisons and incarceration, because I think that's one of the things she's most well known for. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot from this and wrote down a lot of quotes. Like, she's really well spoken and has really great ideas. Like I said, this book doesn't necessarily explain a lot of events. Like, it's not really informative in that way. I think it's just good to go in knowing that and understanding the purpose of this book. I also think it's not the best to read all in one sitting or back to back, because a lot of the ideas and things that she says are a bit repetitive. There's very similar ideas in most of the speeches and interviews, and in fact like very similar phrasing across the different pieces. So I actually think it's better to spread out over time and read one every like week or like just like whenever it might be useful as a bit of like grounding, or to like get a little bit curious or get a bit fired up about these issues in the world. I did appreciate it, and I appreciate Angela Davis, but I don't think my reading experience was perfect, and I don't think this format is exactly what I'm looking for in nonfiction books I read. I especially didn't love the interviews. I felt like they were a bit all over the place, and I feel like that was partially up down to the interviewer. So yeah, I don't want to fault her and like her writing, but I guess just the format of this book has taught me a little bit about what I'm looking for in nonfiction books. But it was really, really useful at especially pulling out the idea of like terror being used as an excuse for more military control and violence. So the next book I read had a lot of similar themes to it, and that was Hostile Homelands by Azad Essa, which is looking at the relationship between India and Israel historically, from when India first became independent all the way up till now, where the BJP far-right government and Modi especially have been really keen to grow in closeness to Israel and to Netanyahu, and sees a lot of themselves in Israel and wants to learn a lot from Israel. So that contemporary relationship is concerning and a bit more evident, I guess. But what I actually found really interesting was learning more of the history and what the relationship between, especially the Indian Congress, which is one of the other major parties, their relationship to Israel and Palestine. India was one of the first countries to recognize Palestine and refused to recognize Israel as a state, and was also a leader in the non-aligned movement during the Cold War, and I guess wanted to see itself as a peace builder. And so it's really interesting how the ideas around peace then came into conflict with like the national interest, and India kind of slowly but surely did turn to Israel. This book goes through the development of their relationship, starting off with military, but also growing closer economic ties, and goes through in quite a lot of detail without being too academic or kind of policy. Like, to me, it was all really interesting and written in a way that still told this overarching story in a really interesting way. A really important factor was neoliberalism and India wanting to join the global economy, and so again, relationships to Israeli companies was a good opportunity there, and it's one that has been really important for Modi and Netanyahu's relationship. But most concerning of all really is the sharing of military equipment, expertise, strategies, including surveillance technology, and these similarities in how India and Israel want to use that on their own citizens or onto kind of marginalized groups within their countries. And it's not just India and Israel, obviously. I think a big part of this book was looking at how Israel wants to export its strategies to the whole world, and actually also India is a gateway into more of the global south, because of India's relationships, I guess. I'm not exactly sure. Another major point in the timeline and in this book was the war on terror and 9/11, as well as there was a terror attack in India. I've forgotten the exact details of it, but I didn't know anything about this actually until I read this book. The war on terror has obviously shaped a lot of the military and also internal like surveillance and control of a bunch of different countries, and also the countries' relationships with each other. I guess the final thing to mention is obviously like Islamophobia and Hindutva, which is like the Hindu far right, and kind of Hindu nationalists, and how they parallel Zionist ideology, and this idea of India and Israel being these great like ancient civilizations, and the kind of mythology and like, yeah, nationalism that is tied to that, and how that nationalism is also dependent on a lot of Islamophobia. I actually think that I bookmarked about half of this book. Like, every single bit of information felt so necessary and illuminating, and also mind-blowing when you put it all together. Safe to say, I think this is a really important book. I think it's interesting just in terms of global politics, but especially anyone who has a connection to India and South Asia and wants to understand like that particular relationship, and especially the kind of ideology and like thought processes behind it. I did mention in my vlog that I just put out that I wanted to hold a workshop unpacking some of this information, but also applying it to a more personal level and a community level to understand how these narratives are being pushed within our communities, because, you know, a lot of this information is just being spread through the media, through like WhatsApp, and, you know, people who are members of the BJP are like actively trying to organize people in diasporas around the world. So I'm really interested in getting more familiar with what that looks like and why that's wrong, or why we should be skeptical of it, or why it's like part of a bigger project. So, I mean, I think that's a bit beyond the scope of this book. The book does talk a bit about American Indian communities and how they have been roped in. We are on the last legs of my phone storage. I've had to start deleting apps. So the next few books I will be talking about in less detail. Technofeudalism, What Killed Capitalism by Yanis Varoufakis. This I can be pretty quick about because I made an entire vlog talking about it. I had a lot of questions reading this, and maybe I didn't do a great job explaining the ideas because it took a lot for my head to wrap around. I think I just find a lot of economic and financial theory quite hard to conceptualize. Like, it just doesn't make sense in my head, and maybe the way that he explained it in a lot of like stories and metaphors actually didn't help me. Like, I think I maybe would have preferred things a little bit more structured. Like, he has like a diagram at the end, and I honestly found that maybe the most helpful. But I don't know if that's just a me problem. Like, I don't want to say that this is really complicated. Like, maybe for other people it will make more sense, and maybe for people who are more familiar with the financial and economic system it will be easier to follow. So just, I don't know, take that with a grain of salt. I think he is quite good at like trying to tell things in a pretty charismatic way. Like, you can still get a real sense of his personality and his voice as you're reading this, which I really appreciated. I think the ideas are super important. If I can try to sum up what his point is that the kind of economic system that runs our world and dictates the kind of work we do and how we relate to each other, and the struggles between, I guess, working class everyday people and the owning class, that has transformed a lot because of cloud capital, which is basically like these algorithms and total ownership of online spaces, digital spaces, so that we need to give them our data and our attention if we want to access anything, as well as these big tech companies that have gotten so much wealth because we have a very broken financial system. And he talks a lot about like Wall Street and different evolutions that have led Wall Street to be at the place it is right now, and also like central banks, that, you know, that part of the financial system I won't go into. I probably couldn't explain clearly even if I wanted to. I think it's a great analysis and super useful at understanding the power dynamics amongst the wealthy in the world right now, but also amongst like us as people trying to navigate tech systems. And it's going beyond the angle of privacy and digital privacy as like a human right, and more understanding like how it actually affects our economic system and leaves us powerless. So I think if you're interested in any of those ideas about like global economic and financial systems, or about technology and how technology is impacting our lives, this is really, really useful at bringing those two things together in a really clarifying way. I don't know if this particular text was the most useful for me to understand those ideas. Like, I do think some videos and like video essays might be more effective at helping me understand personally, but it might just depend on your personal preference. And I linked one of the videos that I found really useful in my vlog as well. He has done lots of videos on his YouTube channel and like lots of interviews, so I would recommend checking those out even if you don't want to read this whole book. But I did think it was a good book and well put together, so I think it's worth giving it a try. On a bit of a different tone, I read But What Will People Say? Navigating Mental Health, Identity, Love and Family Between Cultures, and this is by Sahaj Kaur Kohli. And this is like a psychology, maybe kind of sociology type of book about, immigrant experiences with mental health and intergenerational conflict, I guess. I went into this a little bit skeptical because all I knew was that the author runs a page called Brown Girl Therapy, and just that name kind of made me feel like it was going to be pop psychology vibes and maybe not that deep. But I think she's a registered psychologist, so she does know what she's talking about, and a lot of this is backed up by what seems like good psychological theories and frameworks and research, but it's also quite personal, and I really liked that she wove her personal experiences and a bit of vulnerability throughout the book. It was really a beautiful kind of weaving of personal stories and theories and frameworks, and then also practical ideas and activities or exercises that you could try to apply to your personal life. And I think it covered a lot of different things and a decent amount of like complexity and nuance of being an immigrant trying, or a child of immigrants, trying to figure out your own identity and your relationship to families and communities and your sense of self. So I was actually really pleasantly surprised. Hello, I'm coming in to finish up the video because I ran out of storage as expected and then went to India for a month, so it's taken a while to get this out. But luckily there's not much left. I was just going to talk about one last book, which was Dear Ijeawele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions, by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which I listened to on audiobook. It's very short, and I have to say that I didn't really love it. I think that it wasn't necessarily very new or fresh. It felt like very basic tenets of feminism to me, at least. But I also think it is for a different audience and different context. It was written as a letter to her friend who's about to have a child, and it's kind of about being a mother and a wife even, and a woman in general, raising a child in patriarchal society. And so I think there was maybe some cultural context, or, just sort of life circumstances that were different. And I don't think that makes it bad. I don't think that is a problem. But for me, I would have personally enjoyed it more if there was more maybe storytelling involved rather than just this kind of manifesto. I just didn't give it a rating in the end because I don't want to criticize it, but I didn't necessarily get anything out of it either. So I'm curious whether her other writing does more storytelling and maybe goes into some of the nuances and discussions a bit more, because this one is very short. So that was that. I'm not turned off on the author, but it was just fine. And so yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. I have since read a bunch more books, but I will come back with the end of year wrap up hopefully soon. And yeah, I don't know, it was fun talking about all of these books, and I hope that my ramblings weren't too hard to follow. So yeah, definitely just let me know if any thoughts were sparked, or if you have thoughts on these books or similar kind of books that you've read. Hope you're having a lovely end of year as well, and take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.